Thank you very much. Thank you. My name is Janice O'Driscoll. I'm the Manager of Programs and Partnerships for the Santa Cruz Public Libraries, and I got to have a wonderful month learning about Poe and working with a lot of wonderful people in the community on Santa Cruz Reads, the Big Read grant that we won from the National Endowment for the Arts. There's a lot of people to say thank you to. It's been a wonderful month, and it was partly because we had so many wonderful people to work with. And the first group of people, some of whom are here, would be the grant writing committee for the Friends. Jory Post is here, and Mary Nelson is here in the back. I see Mary. And we sat in the genealogy room in the Santa Cruz Public Libraries and wrote this grant in February and dreamed up all these great ideas, never imagining we would actually win one of these grants. And it was been great fun to see what we came up with come to pass. The one thing that we hadn't thought about was that we would find out whether or not we won the grant in the middle of July, and we of course promised to do our Big Read grant in October. So it didn't give us a lot of time to crank up, but we did it, and I think we did a really good job. Thank you. We've had a lot of wonderful events. We've had scientists talking about birds. We've had a lot of interested readers discussing Poe, discussing stories, discussing poems. We've had the Willing Suspension Armchair Theater reciting poetry. We had a blood drive, 18 pints, I want to tell you, we collected. We've just had a wonderful time. One of the best things was that we worked with the schools. And so it's just been a great community event. I'd like to thank Marianne James, who's here somewhere, back there. She has made all of the work with the schools possible, and Veronica, whom I'm going to introduce in a little bit, also, they've worked so hard to make the school connection work. So let's have a round of applause for the schools. We've had a lot of partners. Bookshop Santa Cruz gave all the raffle prizes for the discussion groups. All of those people who attended the discussion groups know that we had a raffle at the end of each discussion for books that Bookshop Santa Cruz provided for us. The winners of the writing contests have won prizes from either Bookshop Santa Cruz or Capitola Book Cafe, so those were partners of ours. These wonderful posters that you've seen all around here and you've seen all around town were created by Studio Holiday, which is a design firm on Swift Street here on the west side of Santa Cruz, and they gave more than 100% effort to these posters and the visibility of this project, and I want to thank them. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is hear from the winners of the writing contest. And I would like to introduce Veronica Zaleja and Julia Chiapella to introduce the winners and present the awards.
All right, I think we have primarily those of you that were here for the earlier event, so don't really want to repeat myself completely. But I'm Julia Chiapella, and I'm a local teacher and writer.
I'm Veronica Zaleja, and I am the teacher librarian at Santa Cruz High School.
We were judges for the contest, the writing contest, the Santa Cruz Big Reads Edgar Allan Poe writing contest for both poetry and fiction, and our writers rose to the challenge. We are going to now present the winners in those categories. I'm going to present poetry. Veronica will present fiction. So in the poetry category, elementary, middle school students, as you probably heard earlier, were to write a poem no longer than 4 stanzas in echo of Poe's poem, The Bells, which captures sound by use of alliteration, repetition, and onomatopoeia. Oh, and rhythm, too. So I will now present the winners in the poetry category. So the elementary poetry winner for her poem October is Grace Sagow. Congratulations, Grace. There's your... And Grace does not want to read her poem, but she is going to let me read it for her. And it's called October. The month starts with warm days and cool nights. It's my favorite month of the year. Leaves turning colors, falling off trees, swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Collect leaves in a pile, then watch as they start blowing. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. I decorate for Halloween. I love a graveyard scene. Creepy, creepy, creepy. The night has come to dress in costume. Trick-or-treating is here at last. Candy, 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 candy. My bags are ready to be filled. Only one thing on my mind. Candy, 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 candy. Home at last, my bag is full. I'm tired, thirsty, and full of candy, 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 candy. That about sums it up for Halloween, I think. All right, and our next winner, the winner in the middle school student category for poetry from Pacific Collegiate School is Rose Garcia. Rose is going to read her poem called Wind.
Okay. Wind. The breeze, how it whispers as it gently sweeps along, how it ruffles the leaves on the heads of trees, how it rustles, rustles, rustles as it swishes, swishes, swishes through the trees, through the trees. The wind, how it blows, getting stronger, 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 how it blows through the trees, leaves them swishing, swaying, sweeping. Now it whistles, 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 and it's calling, calling, calling through the trees, through the trees. The gale, how it goes, never stopping to wait, how it pushes through the trees, knocking limbs and branches down, how it howls, 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 and it growls, growls, growls through the trees, through the trees. The hurricane, how it swirls, fearlessly, recklessly going, how it crashes through the trees, how it roars, 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 and it booms, booms, booms through the trees, through the trees.
Thank you.
That was such an amazing example of exactly what Poe was doing. The alliteration that went through it, the repetition. Rose did such a beautiful job. Let's hear it for both our winners. And we're on to fiction.
Yes, on to the fiction winners who read Poe's manuscript Found in a Bottle and wrote their own version of imagined or invented journal entries that have been discovered in a bottle. Entries, again, were to be no more than 750 words, which is quite the limitation for these talented writers. Our winner in the high school division for his manuscript, One False Step, is Brad Matthias from Harbor High. Come on up, Brad.
Good way to start. Okay.
Right up by you.
Okay, so the title, like she said, is One False Step. It was 4 a.m. and I was hiking deep in the Santa Cruz Mountains. As I ascended the mountain, my trail became faint, and by 6 a.m., there was no trail at all. Trying not to panic, I took out my cell phone to figure out where I was. I made my way to my GPS app, but then my phone went blank. The battery had died. The trail was gone, and I was lost. I decided to go downhill and hope that I'd run into a road or trail. Around 20 minutes later, I found a trail, so I followed it until there, smack dab in the center of my trail, sat a mountain lion. I was paralyzed with fear and couldn't think what to do, so I jumped behind a nearby tree for cover. I kept really silent and slowly peeked my head around the tree to see that the lion was no more than 30 feet away and beginning to walk towards me. I had to do something fast, so I readied myself to make a run for it back down the trail. The lion was only getting closer, so I pushed off the tree and bolted as fast as I could. The mountain lion immediately began to chase me, so I sprinted off the trail heading down the mountain. I was flying, gaining a big lead on the lion. The lion backed off, but I still continued to run for a few minutes to distance myself from the beast. After a bit, I glanced to see that the lion was gone, and that's when I tripped and fell into some sort of pit. Everything went black. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in a bed. I glanced around the room and had trouble seeing much because it was lit with barely burning bulbs. I could make out old, peeling, mold-stained wallpaper and a large metal door covered in rust. Then I saw it. A figure stood there in the far corner of the room, motionless, so I called to it. "Hello? Where am I?" I got nothing in return, so I spoke louder. "You there! Can you hear me? Where am I?" Still nothing. I sat up to get a better view and got a jolt of pain in my lower back. "Ah!" I screamed in agony. I cautiously ran my shaking hand down my back, and when I got to the side of the pain, I felt cold metal scrape by my fingers. I jerked in fear and fell off the bed to the floor. Looking at my hand, I could see traces of blood, so I stood to find a mirror. Upon rising, I met eyes with the figure across the room. It was a man, probably in his 50s, with skin that seemed to be melting off his flesh. His hair was dark black and coated in a thick layer of gunk that gave it a greasy sheen. He was missing a few fingers, and his clothes were covered in a thick layer of dust. I approached him cautiously and recited once more, "Hello?" waiting for a response, but I got nothing. I stepped into touching range, and that's when I realized it wasn't a person at all. It was an old, decaying wax sculpture. I jumped back in terror and tried to figure out what was going on. I saw a mirror on the far wall and advanced towards it. Seeing myself made me nauseous. My head had been shaven and my face was cut. I turned around to see that my back had been stapled shut as if I had just gotten out of surgery. Now I had lost my mind with fear. I looked around the room frantically for a way out and saw a small window, so I'm escaping, and that's why I'm writing this note, to inform anyone who finds it about what happened to me if I don't make it. "You gotta read this, Tom," Reed, a local hiker exploring the old building, announced while putting the note in his pocket. "Tom! Hey, Tom!" Reed yelled. Then Reed found Tom, frozen, staring at a rotting corpse stuck in the small window.
Thank you so much, Brad. Thank you for entering the contest.
Thank you.
Good job. Good job. Our final winner and reader tonight is the Adult Division winner for her devilish table-turning journal entry, Killing Poe. Please welcome Vinnie Hansen. Welcome, Vinnie.
Thank you. To cleanse my soul, I have pitched my confession to sea, but if you should read this, hear my case. I had borne Edgar's insults the better part of my life, so when the opportunity for retribution presented itself, I seized it. Lest you think me mad, let me assure you that had you suffered his abuse, you would sympathize. When drunken, Edgar was abusive. He would rail against me, calling me his bitter enemy and a dog. In truth, this may have been fair, as I despised the self-pitying charlatan. And has the world not deemed me fit to be a judge? Edgar had always received more than he deserved. He was blessed to be taken under the wings of Mr. and Mrs. John Allen. They afforded him a comfortable life. But after Mr. Allen had so kindly helped Edgar gain entrance to West Point, how did he repay the kindness? The fool refused to go to class. He drank and gambled, shaming Mr. Allen and the family with his court-martial. But the final offense that pierced my very heart was his marriage to Virginia, our 13-year-old cousin. During one of Edgar's worst binges, I offered Virginia and her mother, Maria Clem, a safe home away from that loathsome toad. And Edgar hated me ever after, denouncing me as a cur. He besmirched my honorable reputation. Imagine my delight at the chance for revenge. We all know its intoxicating sweetness, like the honey of mead. The opportunity of which I speak presented itself in October in 1849. Torrential rains poured down on Baltimore, and the wind howled like tormented souls. Only a madman would venture into this storm. However, I pushed myself to the streets, campaigning for the Whigs in the upcoming election. Because the Fourth Ward could fall to the Democrats, we had to use every means to ensure a victory. They had already posted warnings. Democrats of the Fourth Ward, protect your rights. Yours is the ward that will receive the great mass of foreign Whigs. It is your ward that they expect to swell the vote, as if the Democrats did not have their own dirty tricks. With my umbrella pitched against the wind, I spotted the shoes, lifted my head, and was upon the man. His dark, tragic eyes opened wide and glared at me, but he was soaked to the bone and shivering with cold. His white face looked withered beyond his 40 years. I bowed as though I held no hatred in my heart. "My dear cousin," I said, "we are happily met." I thought of his character Montresor smiling at his enemy while thinking of his immolation, and yet, unlike Edgar's insane characters, I had not plotted this event. Edgar was dressed as usual in his black wool suit with vest and neckcloth, but he leaned heavily upon his cane, his face pale as ashes. With his ample forehead and penetrating eyes, the womenfolk found him appealing, but this evening he appeared to be ill. Perhaps this state accounted for his civil greeting. "Nilsson, you look well." "And you, my friend, are you well?" He admitted that he was not, that he felt faint and feverish. I gripped his arm. Then we must get you a nip of Fulton's. This man, who at another time might have swatted me with his cane, allowed me to usher him into a tavern. I smiled to myself, knowing his vulnerability. Edgar had no tolerance for liquor. One drink, maybe two, and he would be mine. In the tavern, I helped him onto a stool and ordered him a whiskey. You can see that my friend is under the weather, I said to the bartender. Stroking his mustache, the man leaned forward and peered at my companion. Edgar Poe, is it not? My blood ran hot, as though indeed for that moment Satan possessed me, but I remained in full command of my faculties. Edgar's popularity was unmerited. The critics called his writing unpleasant and grotesque, yet his status had swelled, and the bizarre fantasies of an opium eater had earned him a degree of success and fame. My cousin weakly nodded his head, and the bartender insisted upon delivering the drink for no charge. For medicinal purposes, it is best to drink quickly. I held the glass to Edgar's lips and poured the liquor down his throat. Alas, dear reader, a tincture bottle holds so few words. But take heart, the remainder exists.
Thank you so much. Thank you for entering. Thank you. We suspected that Edgar Allan Poe might inspire the imagination of the many creative people in this community. And as you can see, it was a pleasure to be a judge reading the many entries, and we thank everyone again for entering the contest. And thank you for coming.
You know, we're recording this event. Community TV of Santa Cruz County is recording this event, and you'll be able to see all of the things that happened tonight on several showings on the TV. But we also want to take a picture because we have all these writers here, and one writer in particular might be a little worried, but actually Edgar Allan Poe is here, and so is Lori King. So could I ask the winners to come forward, and Lori and Mr. Poe, and maybe we could take a quick picture?
Now, madam, I appreciate your fanciful fiction.
You are dead.
But I have to challenge your facts. But, you know, I appreciate your, I don't know what I appreciate about that. All right. That's enough. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hello, Lauren.
Poe inspired mystery and a little worry and a little horror maybe in some of his stories, but also some magic and sleight of hand. And the next person to speak is actually someone who is a magician and a lover of Poe. I'd like to introduce Brent Gifford. He's going to come up and talk about one of Poe's particularly interesting stories.
Well, we'll find out. It's always the tricky part, being the blind guy, is finding out where I am. Okay, so, yeah, as Janice said, I'm Brent Gifford. I'm known as the Great Blindini. Now you see it, now I don't. I'm known as the Great Blindini for two reasons. Two reasons. One, I can't see, hence the guide dog. That's Yankee Doodle, by the way, just so everybody's, you know, he goes with me most everywhere. And two, no one will hire the mediocre blindini. That's really what it comes down to. And the story in particular, that I've done a couple of things, a couple of events during this big read project. One was about the psychology of Poe and how he writes. A lot of the things that he writes tend to evoke idiomotor response in us, you know, like sucking on a lemon, that kind of stuff, or, you know, it's a little yawn or a little scratch, any of that kind of stuff. A lot of Poe's writing evokes idiomotor response within our bodies. That's one of the reasons I think that Poe's, the magic of Poe and the writing of Poe has lasted for close to 200 years. And the story that I was kind of interested in most recently was William Wilson. And Janice tells me they did the talk about that last night. To me, that story in particular sort of demonstrates, it almost feels autobiographical, the way Poe lived his young life. And not the least of which is, what was it that William Wilson liked? He liked basically gambling and carousing and things of that nature. I'm taking out a deck of cards just to demonstrate kind of a point that worked for William Wilson. I mean, it's a kind of a descent into madness story and things like that. And I'll do my best not to go that far at this particular point, but I'm going to demonstrate, well, I'm going to attempt to demonstrate, it's never a guarantee, but I'm going to demonstrate a technique in gambling that is used. It was actually mentioned in William Wilson. There was a place in the story in William Wilson about him getting caught. Not necessarily cheating per se, but he got caught with cards that weren't quite legit. This is a regular deck. If anybody can see, faces are different, backs are the same. Yeah, right. That's the case, but here comes the tough part. I can't see you, so I need someone out there to yell at me because I'm going to throw a deck of cards at the audience, okay? Oh no, here comes a liability issue. I could just hear it coming. Okay, so somebody over there say yay and let me throw the cards at them. Yay. Yay. Wow. Okay, let's have a hand for the catch. Okay, there we go. Okay, and who caught him? Eric. Okay, so Eric, what I'd like you to do is just crack the deck open at one index corner, look at one index corner only, and keep it in your head. You play cards so you know what you're looking at? Yes. Okay, so you got one? Okay, well, I did this the other night, and the guy had no clue at the end of the trick. You've got to know what a card is before. I'm like, okay, so do you have one in your head, Eric? Okay, so toss it in another direction and just keep that card in your mind, and we'll have a second person do exactly the same thing. Who got the deck the second time? Paul, okay. Crack it open, look at one. Okay. Got it? Got it in your head? Yes. Okay, so Eric, raise your hand. Paul, raise your hand. Toss it one more time.
Rod.
Okay, Rod. You got the idea, right?
And I've got a card in mind, too.
Cool. Did you look at it in the deck? Okay. I have lots of cards in my mind, but it doesn't always necessarily. Okay, so here comes the tricky part. So Eric and Paul and Rod, you each have a card in your hand, in your head, right, that you've seen in the deck. Okay, so each raise your hand so that I'll get to that point in a second. And Rod, toss the deck back.
Okay.
Give it a shot.
All the way back to you?
Yeah, let's see what happens. Blind guy. Yeah, blind guy, and really, you know. The 49ers will not be looking for you soon. Okay, so I don't want to touch the deck until we're done, but this is the part that I would like to demonstrate. That one of the things William Wilson recognized, or didn't recognize until late, that, you know, the descent into madness, all that kind of stuff. One of the things a gambler needs to be able to do is read other gamblers' tells. And so the three men with their hands raised have all looked at a card, all have a card in their head. If I find it and mention it through your tells, I'd like you to lower your hand. Is that okay? Is that clear?
Yes. Yes.
5 of clubs, 8 of hearts, king of spades. Ah.
2 out of 3.
Ace of diamonds.
You got it.
Okay. There was that other tell, you know, what can I say? Thank you very much. It's been a really fun month for me to be able to present personally one of my favorite writers in a way that he doesn't always get. Poe is always kind of thought of as kind of horror and dark and all this kind of stuff, and I've tried to make it fun for younger kids coming up, so they'll go and read some more Poe, because there's just such a myriad of wonderful material there. And for anybody who's thinking about writing or TV or doing anything in the show business, including writing, can do really no better than to read as much Poe as you can absorb. And I thank the library and the NEA for the opportunity to come out and do this. Thanks.
Well, if we have these two great writers here, I'd like to hear from them. So I thought maybe Mr. Poe and Lori King, our great own Santa Cruz mystery writer, could come up and maybe talk about detective stories and writing. Let's welcome them.
Oh, there she is. I feel compelled on some level to clear up some misconceptions about my life. Now, I'm happy to continue with this interview as long as you know that I was never insane. I was never crazy. Perhaps my highs were higher than most, and my lows were lower, but that's just the way I lived my life. And the rumors of my drug abuse have been greatly exaggerated. And I think that's enough. Except that my cousin Nelson and I were quite close. I cannot believe that he would conspire to take me out. Upon my death, you see, there was someone very much like this woman right here, a fellow by the name of Rufus Griswold, who was my Salieri. And Rufus waited on the sidelines for me to pass, and upon my passing wrote the first biography, which was really an extended obituary, in which he took some of my personal letters which I had entrusted to him, and he rewrote them, and he created the image of me being a drug addict and a man of insane proportions. And it was Nelson, see, who got together with the rest of my family and put together the very first biography of Edgar Allan Poe. And it took them 10 years to actually compile this biography. And by that time, the damage of Rufus Griswold had taken root. And we still, here in the year 2011, have the image of Edgar Allan Poe as being this drug-induced crazy writer. Now, I've read a little bit about your local new writers, not your local writers, but more modern writers. And I believe that it is safe to say that under some drug-induced state, you can write, "I can't get no satisfaction." But I do not believe that you can write, "Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary." Miss King, how are you today?
Good evening. Thank you for coming and sharing yourself with Santa Cruz.
It's my pleasure.
We follow in your footsteps gingerly. One of the things that most interested me in looking at your oeuvre is the division between the different flavors of your stories. You have macabre stories, you have romance stories, and you have very clear detective stories. Would you like to say something about those detective stories? What you were trying to do with them? Are they an intellectual game, or?
Well, there was a bit of that at play. I'm a man who likes to wrestle within the realm of my own thoughts and see what comes on top. And I spent a lot of my time working in magazines as an editor of magazines. And one of my tricks that I learned to draw in subscribers was to create games with our subscribers. And one of the games that was very, very popular, as you well know, was in creating little codes that I would publish in a magazine and invite the audience to decode. And oftentimes there were little prizes if you could decode the little secret that was written in there, a kind of secret code that I liked. Now these codes were pretty simple by today's standards, but back then in the 1830s, they were quite intricate. And it was a new idea. And I was a man, I mean no offense, but I was pretty much the smartest man in the room.
I think you still are.
And so what happened, madam, was that I found it interesting to demonstrate that a bit. And so it seemed only likely and only logical that the use of a detective, someone who would take clues from very, very far sources and bring them all together like a scientist, seemed to be a very, very simple and fun way for me to pull everything together. Although I was very interested, you see, in the stories of murder that appeared in the local newspapers. I don't know what else. Continue, I see, because I know that you have written.
Now there's a device called the internet.
Okay.
On which the occasional bit of wisdom is bestowed, and a lot of real nonsense. There was an interesting article I came across tracing 44 of the literary devices often used in mystery stories that can be traced to none other than Mr. Poe, including the brilliant, if eccentric, private detective with a genius for applying pure inductive and deductive reasoning to human behavior, a baffling crime, a locked room, the friend to whom the detective tells the facts, the names of innocent suspects, the detective's observations of the crime scene, the battle of wits with the official police, the end where the detective reveals in a satisfying manner how he solved the case, the police asking the detective for help, and the detective solving the case from his armchair by reading newspaper accounts and official data. The detective also personally wants to settle with the culprit.
I see you've read much of my work.
I have. Yeah. Now, some years after you were writing, a gentleman by the name of Arthur Conan Doyle, who was a doctor, not a terribly well-employed doctor, sat in his surgery waiting for patients, waiting and waiting for patients. And waiting for patients. And
did he have patience as he was waiting for the patients?
He tried to.
Oh, I see.
And in the meantime, he wrote a story, which was sometime later published as a study in Scarlet, the first chapter of which is The Science of Deduction. Now, he too is a very bright detective, the smartest one in his room. And he too had a friend, like Auguste Dupin, had a friend who wrote down with great admiration his case. And his friend is saying he didn't understand how Mr. Holmes was his name, came across this, figured this thing out. It is simple enough as you explain it, I said, smiling. You remind me of Edgar Allan Poe's Dupin. I had no idea that such individuals did exist, outside of stories. Sherlock Holmes rose and lit his pipe. "No doubt you think that you are complimenting me in comparing me to Dupin," he observed. "Now, in my opinion, Dupin was a very inferior fellow. That trick of his of breaking in on his friend's thought with an apropos remark after a quarter of an hour's silence is really very showy and superficial. He had some analytical genius, no doubt, but he was by no means such a phenomenon as Poe appeared to imagine." Sir, have you any comments? We have first murdered you, and now we have slandered you. I'm very sorry. Welcome to Santa Cruz.
What you'll do to the dead baffles the mind. Now, I find it very interesting, and I believe it only makes sense. This author, Conan Doyle, went off to earn a tremendous living off the creation of this character, which was patterned after my C. Auguste Dupin. And it only makes sense at some point he would have to face the music. You see, he would have to admit that there is some semblance between his character and the character that preceded him that was my creation. And I do not blame him for being a bit defensive. For at the time that he wrote this, he was trying to create for himself a career. And when we're all in the throes of trying to create a name for ourselves, everything is fair game. And I believe that's really where he stood. Because I cannot, for the life of me, imagine that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle would have any contempt for the author who created the genre that made him so famous. So I'm going to give him a pass on this.
Well, he did say, "Each story is a root from which a whole literature has developed. Where was the detective story until Poe breathed the breath of life into it?"
And now I like him better.
He's a man worth studying. Some of us, to this day, have managed to follow in your well-carved tracks of Monsieur Dupin, and continue to write stories that have a detective very similar to that, in fact. Some of us continue to make a living off of it, in fact.
I do not begrudge anyone making a living.
Believe it or not. And in fact, a couple of years ago, one of the country's primary writers got together a bunch of friends and asked each of us to write something about stories from honoring Edgar Allan Poe. My piece in here basically says, I can't do anything that you haven't done first. So it's really a great frustration and a great pleasure to meet Edgar Allan Poe, both on the page and in the person. And I would like to give you a copy of that. So, it is a lovely book with many of the country's top writers doing stories in honor of you.
May I say something about that?
Please.
You know, it is the highest, they say that imitation is the highest form of flattery. And of course that is true. But all I did was write from that which I knew. And in order to write what I wrote, I had to live the life that I had to live. And we all have ideas and thoughts, and some people even have attitudes about the life that I lived. But the truth be told, it were the cards that were dealt me, and I did the best I could. And I'm sure that if we all looked into the mirror and examined our own existence, we would have to say that there were times when we didn't meet our own expectations of ourselves. But the one thing that I did and was always true to was my writing. And I wrote from that which I knew. And I knew death. Sadly, I knew death. And I knew the loss of love. And I knew the pain and agony of a lonely existence. And to create this, and to be placed in a position where someone would do this kind of homage, I had to dedicate my life. And it wasn't just in moments like this. I had to dedicate every waking moment and every sleeping moment to that loneliness and that pain and that sorrow. And I'm just grateful that I had the insight to put it down on paper. Thank you. This is beautiful. Did you write? And you have one of these stories in here. I'm going to ask you to autograph this for me. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
No one else who did a big read had the experience we just had. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for celebrating this month with us and being here for our grand finale and enjoying all of the things that we learned about Poe and learned about all of the things that he wrote about. I'd like to end by introducing our library director, Teresa Landers, who's been a support for the Big Read and for all the programs we do at the Santa Cruz Public Libraries. Teresa?
I would really like to extend a special thank you to Janice. You have no idea how hard this woman has been working the last 2 months, and she just deserves a major round of applause. And what I'd like to, I don't want it to stop here. This was a great program, a great effort. We can't do this every month. There's no way. We don't have time or money. But the library is we're really trying to position ourselves to be what the community really needs. And I've got a wonderful quote that really talks about what we're trying to become and be for our community. And I think I have it memorized, but I have it just in case because it's been a long week. The library's most powerful asset is the conversation that they provide between books and readers, between children and parents, between individuals and the collective world. Turns out that libraries have nothing at all to do with silence. So please join us as we move forward and continue the conversation with the community that we started through this program and that we hope to continue through everything that we do in the coming months, in the coming years, whether we do a Big Read again or a Santa Cruz Reads independent. There's a California Reads program. Please join us and join us in the conversation and join us in the conversation over this incredible cake that's back there. And thank you all for coming.